Good afternoon, everyone. We'll give people just a moment to join the call. As we get started here. All right. I am Dr. Quinton Morris. I am the artist, scholar in residence here at King FM. I am pleased to host these two wonderful friends of mine, as well as colleagues, for a very lively conversation. As people are starting to join the room, which I hope that you guys do very soon, we are going to be talking about the importance of BIPOC composers and performers in classical music. Tomorrow is the debut of my new show here at Classical King FM. It is called Unmute the Voices, where we celebrate the artistry of BIPOC composers and performers in classical music. And so all of these virtual events that we have been doing have all been kind of a preview to give the viewer and the listener an opportunity to see kind of what this show is all about. So because this is a radio show, we think it's most appropriate to start with some music. So here we go. So that music that you just heard is music that I commissioned. That is the theme music for Unmute the Voices. It's written by Tahira Whittington, who is a cellist and composer out of Chicago. Tahira is a very dear friend of mine. She is African-American and just a wonderful musician who has performed in Hamilton. She's currently in Dear Evan Hansen, the musical, and has done a number of renowned chamber music and solo performances around the country. So, Brenda and Krishna, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Thank you so much for celebrating with me on the eve of Unmute the Voices.
It's very exciting. I can't wait for tomorrow at 3 o'clock to hear the program for the first time on the radio.
I can't either. I have to admit, I am really nervous. Really nervous.
No need to be. It's going to be fantastic.
I certainly hope so. Brenda, I just kind of want to start with you first. This is kind of you had this idea of having this type of show on here at the station. Can you tell me a little bit about your thought process on why King FM decided to create the show Unmute the Voices?
Well, part of it, honestly, was I was thinking about what we needed to do to diversify our programming. So I called my good friend and colleague, Dr. Quinton Morris, and I said, Quinton, what should we be doing? How should we be getting started on this really important work? And Quinton said, Brenda, you need an artist, scholar in residence, and it needs to be someone who's BIPOC. And can really help guide this effort for the station. So I thought about it, and a couple of days later, I said, you know what, Quinton, I think this is a great idea, and I think you should be that person.
I still can't believe you did that.
And then you said, I want to create a show. And then you thought about it and came up with the name Unmute the Voices, which is perfect. And we're just so honored at King FM to be able to work with you on it and to be able to air the show. We're really excited about it. Everyone on the staff, the board, we've gotten so much positive response from listeners, and that's not the norm in our field. We usually hear from people who are unhappy, but we've just had an outpouring of response from listeners saying how happy they are that we're working with you and that they're doing this work at the station.
Well, thank you. It is certainly a pleasure to be here. You know, I have grown up listening to King FM for a long time. And as you know, and I've told this story before about Live by George, which was a show that George Shangro had in the 90s, was very near and dear to my heart as a student. And so it kind of feels full circle to be back here now, talking about Unmute the Voices and creating this show where we can really highlight the excellence that people of color have contributed to the classical music community. From a symphony standpoint, Krishna, why is it important for people of color to be represented, whether it's in orchestras or whether it's the soloists or guest artists who come in? Why is it important now for the Seattle Symphony to really diversify its programming?
Well, I would say there's no specific reason from a symphony standpoint. I would say it is important, period, for composers of color to be represented. But I'm glad that we have finally really come to the realization that it requires a lot of work on our part to make the stage accessible, to open it. In the past, just to explain, I think there was a very strong international market and a lot of orchestras were recycling the same artists over and over. And now we're beginning to realize that we have to change things up quite a bit. And actually COVID helped us a lot, because with COVID, suddenly there was a stronger focus on the regional and the local artists. And what we found is there is a much higher percentage of BIPOC composers, singers, songwriters that are right here, that are very, very active, that deserve to have access to our stage. But also, and I want to keep this short, there was always this question of, do we have enough of an understanding? Is there enough of a pipeline? And there's always been activity with BIPOC composers and performers. I can just tell you that when I was a student at Indiana University, composer David Baker was teaching my jazz class, right? But when I was a student, I didn't realize this guy is a giant in the industry and his music ought to be played. When I was a young CEO at the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra, Jessie Montgomery was on stage as an intern, a musician intern. Today, she's becoming one of the giants of our industry in terms of her compositions. We know William Grant Still was out there a long time ago, but we forget Wynton Marsalis has been with us this whole time as a journey. And his contribution is just as important as the Sergei Rachmaninoffs, the Tchaikovskys, the Beethovens, and anybody else. So it's just time for us to catch up with reality.
I really appreciate that. And I don't know if you've been talking to Brenda or someone here at the station, because David Baker opens the second episode of Unmute the Voices. His blues movement from his cello sonata opens the second episode. Jessie Montgomery, of course, I've known since we were students. She played 2 seasons in my group, The Young Eight. And I remember very specifically being in a cab in New York City with her and another young lady named Dawn Smith, or Johnson, she's married now. And the 3 of us talking, and Jessie saying, yeah, I think I really want to be a composer. And of course, watching her career now. And then finally, I'm the co-chair of the Seattle Arts Commission. And so I would be remiss not to say that I appreciate the fact that you are publicly acknowledging the talent and the support of artists that are here in Seattle, because there are so many, and it just makes me happy to hear that the Symphony has done outreach to bring those people in to such an amazing orchestra. So I appreciate that. Brenda, can you talk a little bit about what else King FM is doing? I mean, we of course have Unmute the Voices that begins tomorrow, but what other sorts of initiatives are is King doing to diversify its programming?
You know, we actually have a new strategic framework that our board adopted in December. That's a 5-year plan to really change at every level of our organization, our thinking and our structure and our staffing, all around increasing diversity. So we want to increase the diversity of our staff and our board. Our board is equally committed to these goals. And we've set a goal on the air for playing a piece every hour by a woman composer or a composer of color. And we've been ramping up towards that goal, and we've been achieving that goal now for a couple of weeks. And it's making the station sound better. And we just had a meeting actually yesterday with a team that meets monthly to kind of evaluate our programming. And we all agreed it sounds more alive, it sounds more relevant, it sounds better because of what we're doing. And we really believe that we have the opportunity to do even more, particularly as we work on the recorded repertoire. We're held to the recorded repertoire, and as the work that you're doing, Quinton, and the work you're doing, Krishna, that's going to make an enormous difference in shifting the recorded repertoire, which means we're going to have more availability. You know, over these next few years, we'll have more opportunity to make even more changes in our programming.
So what sort of advice can both of you give to the classical music community as a whole? Because you both are doing such innovative and not just innovative, but really kind of cutting edge and very different. You're distinguishing yourselves as an organization, respective organizations, from other classical music organizations such as symphonies or radio stations that may not be as diverse. Can you give some advice to our colleagues on why this is important and what steps one might take in order to incorporate diversity within their programming?
You know, I want to brag on Krishna for a second, because I've been so impressed with the work that Krishna's been doing. I mean, he hasn't just started this work in the past year. He's been doing it for years. And actually, of all of the concerts that I was so sad to miss during the pandemic, there was a concert where the symphony was going to perform a piece of Florence Price that I never had the opportunity to hear live. And I was so sad that that program was canceled during the pandemic. But it just shows you that Krishna's been doing this work. And what I know from kind of watching from the back seat of the auditorium is that he works with his board on this very, very closely and carefully. He works with his musicians on this. He's got the whole organization communicating and talking and working on it. And my feeling is that's part of the reason that he and the symphony are so successful and have been for several years, and really pushing this agenda forward.
So everyone should just look to Krishna.
I'm gonna.
That's my advice. That's my advice.
I'm starting to feel a little shy here, Brenda. Thank you so much for that. I mean, look, I'm looking to King FM for ideas. I'm looking to my conversations with you, Quinton, for ideas. I am very fortunate to have an extraordinary team at the Seattle Symphony. Brenda is right. It's a team effort. It's the board, it's the staff, it's the musicians. During the pandemic, we actually kept the musicians on for that reason, because they have ideas, they have friends, they know who they're talking to, they make music off-site in smaller ensembles, meet new people. So I think the advice I have is to be open, to be receptive, and to be courageous, to try things in a new way, and not to think that tradition has to be a shackle. Tradition needs to be reimagined right now, because tradition also means you can write new traditions, right? You are not bound to the old traditions only. And I think in the performing arts and in classical music, I think we were a little bit constrained by our understanding of tradition. And it is time to write a new story. And that actually brings a sense of excitement that translates also to your patrons, to your supporters. They begin to realize they are helping you write history in a new way, in a good way. It's exciting, right? I think we can all agree that there was a little bit of a moment where it felt like a sort of staleness setting in, where we had the same old repertoire over and over and over. And it was time to renew. It was time to go a different direction. And then on top of that, I think it requires the courage to give young people a chance. And isn't that what art is about? Giving young people a chance? Every generation of artists comes out of a generations of people who want to do things differently, who are a little rebellious, who are pushing the envelope. That's the point of art. You don't want to repaint the same painting. No, you want to create a new style, right? So, I mean, I also want to include the opera in this. When the opera brought recently Kazim Abdullah, who I knew as a woodwind player and symphony in C way back when I was just a wee lad. But when they brought him to conduct, I was so happy. I didn't realize they had brought him in, and then we met for coffee. We've got Thomas Wilkins coming next week conducting a Norwegian tuba concerto, right? I mean, this is the kind of new connections that I think are great. And I think we just need to embrace it. It makes me smile because it makes us happy. And that's what we got to do, make ourselves happy.
You know, I really agree with that. I would say I'm more excited about my job now than I've ever been. In 30 plus years of managing public radio stations and public classical stations, because I feel like we really have the momentum and the opportunity to create real inclusion in the field and really develop a new kind of a new life for classical music. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to work with Krishna, and one of our most important partners on this, and also working with you, Quinton, and have you working with King FM and helping me create the transformation in our organization. It's just a really exciting time.
You know, I really appreciate hearing your perspectives, both of you, on bringing a freshness to classical music, because it's so needed. But I want to play devil's advocate for those who are saturated in tradition, where you have your, Viennese program that is very, very important, right? Or even those musicians who want to continue to play the greats of Beethoven and Mozart, and not to discount any of them, but they are stuck in tradition. What do you say to those people who might be concerned that they might lose patrons, they might lose audience members, they might lose supporters of classical, longtime supporters of classical music, who might be turned off by doing works that are not traditional? What do you say to those people who are within the organizations, whether they're musicians or administrators or even patrons? What do you say to those people?
I think I'm going to defer to Brenda in a moment here, but I think my answer is there's good music, period. And if you're making good music, you will have strong, good support. You may not always have the same support from every person on every program, because everybody's allowed to have their own taste. Taste is it's your judgment, not mine, right? But as long as what we do and we execute it really well, and we only have the best people on stage for that reason, you make good music, you will have strong support. And so I think the question of whether increasing diversity on stage could lead to a loss of support, I have not seen evidence for that at all.
Yeah, I would say we have already, since we've been, pretty dramatically increasing the presence of BIPOC composers and performers on our station the past year. what I can say is, yes, we've had a handful of people write and say, I want to cancel my membership. I don't want to support King FM because you're going down this path that I don't like, or you're giving in to wokeness, or, whatever. We've definitely had that sentiment. And what I say to people is I always try to be respectful, but I also am clear and firm. I say, we will cancel your membership today. I'm very sad that you feel that way, because we feel this is really great music, and it's important for this music to be heard and for these performers to be recognized for the excellent work they do and their contributions to the field. We have a firm commitment to doing this work, and we will continue to do it. I hope you'll continue to listen, and maybe over time you'll change your mind. So that's really the way I put it. And then on the other hand, we've lost a tiny bit of money over here, from those people, but we've gotten probably $100,000 or more in unsolicited contributions from people saying, we're so glad you're doing this work. It's so important. We want to support it. Again, it's like $100,000 versus over here, maybe, $200-300. It's a pretty easy decision. It's a pretty easy choice to move forward and continue to do this work. And it's just wonderful to have that support of the vast majority of the people in our audience. And I'm sure that's equally true of the Seattle Symphony.
Krishna?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, please. Response.
I think that Brenda has really outlined the case succinctly. The most important part for me as a symphony orchestra is that I need to reflect in my audience, on my stage, with my board, and in my staff, the greater society of the United States. I don't even mean just Seattle. I mean the greater, society of the United States, because we are now a national company with Grammy Awards. We're, on a streaming platform. We're being played by King FM and many other radio stations. We have a national presence. We have a national obligation. Responsibility is perhaps the better word. So there's room for Tchaikovsky, but there's also room for everybody else. There's room for Beethoven, and there's also room for everybody else. Let's not forget, Johann Sebastian Bach was silenced for about 100 years until Mendelssohn brought him back, right? So it isn't really, if you think about all this tradition we have, and it becomes this backpack that you can't carry anymore because it gets so huge that you're just sort of dragging it behind you, then you lose the ability to run or to walk. And COVID has taught me that we need to be nimble, and we need to react to a little bit what's current. What is the vibe right now? What are people really longing for? What's the kind of music that has to be composed today to properly express how we feel? And there's music that was composed in the wake of George Floyd. There's music being composed in the wake of the tragedy of COVID in India. There's music that's being composed in Europe for small COVID ensembles. In every part of the world, we are reacting to our reality. And I think that so what I'm trying to say here is, and I'm sorry if I'm being very confusing, but what I'm trying to say here is it's a yes and question, not a binary question. We need everybody in, nobody out.
How have you both changed post George Floyd's death and COVID? As leaders in classical music, how would you both say that you have changed as people and as leaders?
You want to go first, Brenda? Sure. I would say, number one, when the murder of George Floyd and the protests happened, it really made me do a huge amount of soul searching. And I had actually one of my staff members, I was talking to one of my staff members and saying, I just really this is helping me understand the breadth and depth of the problem. And she said to me, you're actually part of the problem, because you're not, you are welcoming, and you do promote diversity and you are excited about diversity. And so you've never really completely, opened yourself up until now to the possibility that most of the world isn't like you. And it was really helpful to hear that. And it was really helpful to me to spend some time doing a lot of reading and a lot of personal reflection and a lot of thinking. And then also recognizing that despite my strong mission and desire to make the world of classical music more inclusive, there was a lot of work that I wasn't doing that I could be doing. And that really started me and the staff and the board of the organization thinking together about what more can we be doing, what should we be doing, and how do we really make a commitment to this that's enduring and lasting and real, and that we measure our progress towards our goals. So, as I said earlier, I'm really excited about the opportunity to do this. And it's because of that reflection and because of having, the reality of being a person of color in this country and in the world, really having shown the George Floyd murder and the protest shining a big light on that. So I'm embarrassed that I didn't get it sooner, honestly, but I feel like the important thing to do is to set that aside, recognize it's there, but really focus 100% of myself towards action.
Yeah, for me, it's difficult to actually answer this question because I didn't react to it from an artistic lens of as a performing arts executive. It was visceral for me. It was personal for me. It was a moment that had occurred so many times before in history, but we had become numb and allowed it to happen and then pass and then go on with our lives. And it was this moment where I decided this is sort of the enough is enough moment. The brutalization, the brutality of the image, the helplessness of the crowd, the helplessness of the victim, the lack of justice or fairness. We use the word equity. I want to use the word justice, just basic lack of access to justice. The marginalization, I can just go on and on. So one of the things that I decided, and there actually didn't have full support, but I decided to push forward was, and by now we're getting support, we wanted to create internal awareness that if you don't have people of color in decision-making positions in your organization, if they don't have a voice, then all your diversity is not as effective as it needs to be. So we actually created a 30% people of color minimum in our board officer functions, in our chair functions on the board, in our senior leadership team. The orchestra is still working out how it can react to all of this, but it became clear to me that if we don't want these murders to continue, then we need to have people who understand the problem firsthand in functions of authority and being able to influence how big decisions are being made. That's as best as I can say it without really, getting emotional here, because to me, what is so traumatic is that George Floyd wasn't the first, and he certainly isn't the last. And to have what we call an enlightened, educated society where this can continuously happen, and we don't have millions on the street demonstrating for basic justice and fairness, that is shocking to me for a modern society.
Do you believe that our industry has had this type of deep reflection as the world starts to open up and we go back to finding this normalcy in our lives? Do you believe that the classical music community has done that deep reflective work?
if I don't know that I have a good answer for you, but if I try to extrapolate our responsibility,
Mhm.
if we can agree that George Floyd was possible because a marginalization of an African American man
Mhm.
and the dismissive nature as towards an African American man's intentions in that moment, that is something that was created over many years, over decades. Then if we can portray African American men and women as people of integrity, creativity, and authority through our industry, then we can change the narrative that may have contributed to this marginalization. But I think the performing arts are just a small part of the creative industries that can do that.
Right.
If you look at Hollywood, there is a certain stereotype that most young African American male actors are forced into playing. We can stop that. And by the way, it's the same stereotype that many young Asian American women are forced to play too. I mean,
Mhm.
that's not a unique problem, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And frankly speaking,
Black women too. Yeah.
Middle Eastern
And
men are always the terrorists or the cab drivers. Black
Mhm.
women are the eye candy. Asian women,
Mhm.
I mean, women in general
Hispanic.
are the
Yeah.
eye
Yeah.
candy, right?
Right.
What
Right.
is wrong with that picture so much? And African American men in most movies are usually in a situation where they're somehow a very disturbed human being that is either about to commit a crime or needs to be
Mhm.
reformed. What nonsense is that?
Mhm. Mhm.
Nonsense. It's not how life needs to be portrayed every single time. What about just a normal story about a person who has, responsibilities in life and
Right.
is finding it difficult to live up to everybody's expectations, including their partners or their children's, or, you know, anyway. But I think what we can do in the performing arts world is to show the creativity that's out there, show the ingenuity that's out there, has been out there for a long time, show the respect that that deserves. I think the respect, there's no justice unless there's respect.
Yeah. Say it.
Yeah, and I think we
Yeah.
actually therefore have an opportunity to lead. If we come out strong, and all, and I hear across the country, not just in Seattle, that a lot of organizations are going through this same reckoning and really thinking about this and making changes. We were talking just to Meany Center here in Seattle not long ago, and they said they have now essentially a policy that on every single program, there's going to be a piece by a composer of color. I think if every organization does that kind of work, the kind of work we're talking about, we can actually lead in this territory. And, I love what Krishna said about having the opportunity to create a different image and a correct image.
That's really beautiful. I appreciate you both sharing and sharing from a place of vulnerability, because where we are in our field, a healing really does need to take place. But it starts with that deep reflection of oneself. And so, Krishna, when you said I wasn't looking at this from an administrator, arts leader perspective, I was looking at this more from a personal perspective. I appreciated that because as we start to open up, I want us as a industry, as a field, to hold on to that vulnerability, to hold on to that personal, deep connection of learning what it means to respect your fellow human being, right? So, for instance, if a Black man or a person of color walks into Benaroya Hall who may not be dressed in a suit, but has paid a ticket to come and hear great music, the culture needs to shift where it's, what are you doing here too? Aren't you looking forward to this concert? Oh my God, what's on the program, right? And that is a bit of the culture within classical music that we judge based on perception of how one looks. We judge on how one plays, right? Versus who they are as people. Not to say that any of those things aren't important, but the character of an individual is so much more important. And when we are able to share in that human experience together, that's when great art happens. And that's something that I hope as the world starts to open up, that we hold on to, is the respect and the deep reflection for one another.
I couldn't agree more. And you're right how you described the issue of someone coming to Benaroya Hall that might perceive to be barriers, and that actually might have run into behavior in the past where there was a question, why are you here? Oh, you're here for a concert? I didn't expect you to be here.
Right.
I can tell you that even I was triple checked on my tickets in my first week on the job, because there was a question whether I belonged into the seat where I was sitting. These things happen, and they keep happening, and it's not okay, and we need to address it.
How do we change that culture?
By constantly educating the people who have to do that job, to basically, the customer comes first. There's a customer that's entering your hall. That's what this is. This is a patron. This is a supporter. End of story. And the patron comes first. To engaging in constant training, which we're doing now at the Seattle Symphony. We have instituted DEI training on all levels, including board, staff, musicians, volunteers. But it's a long, I do not expect this to change overnight. This is a long journey. There is behavior that has been ingrained. Think about it this way. Forget this whole idea about it being just about race. In classical music, we have the same problem with some people who say everything before Prokofiev is awesome, everything after Prokofiev, I'm not going to come to the concert. Think about it that way. If you've been conditioned that way, you have knee-jerk reactions, especially when you don't expect them. And there's a lot that needs to be overcome. But and this is where I'm sorry, I don't want to go too deep into this, but this is not just an American problem.
It's a world problem.
There is a world problem where there's a certain segment of the population that is uncomfortable with the rate of change. And that is uncomfortable with the perceived chaos that change could bring. And we have to be clear that we are evolving, and that evolution on these topics is a good thing. And that that the status quo was not a good thing. And that's what George Floyd clearly shows. That is not a status quo worth having.
Beautifully said. So, last question. What's your advice for me moving forward? You both are very respected leaders. You're friends of mine. I'm moving into this new territory. What's your advice as I introduce our community to a community of people who have been largely marginalized? And we know not everyone is going to accept this at first. What's your advice for me as a Black man now at a classical radio station, introducing the world to BIPOC performers and composers? What's your advice?
It's be bold, be brave, share with us some really good music that I've never heard before, so that I am impelled to program it on my stage.
Promise.
I don't have advice for you, Quinton. I'm going to be calling you.
Oh, man. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I feel the same way. You know, I feel like we're really, really lucky to have you doing this work because your background, you know, your knowledge of music, the fact that you have contacts all over the country and all over the world. You're so respected in Seattle and revered and loved. That's the key, is to have someone introducing this music that people already love and trust and respect, and then they open up their minds and their ears. So I think you're the secret ingredient in all of this. And you know, you're going to choose great music and great composers and introduce us to great performers too. And I think we're all going to really benefit from walking along the journey with you on this. So I'm just so grateful that you're willing to do this and jump in. And I'm so excited for the first program tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you both so much for joining me on this virtual pre-launch party for my show, Unmute the Voices. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock Pacific, 3 o'clock p.m. Pacific, my new show, Unmute the Voices, debuts on Classical King FM 98.1. You can go to our Facebook page where you can live stream it if you are not in the Seattle area. Of course, you can go to our website, king.org/unmute the voices to learn more about the show and about, of course, King FM as well. I want to thank Brenda and Krishna for joining me. I really appreciate it. And I hope that all of you will tune in tomorrow for the debut episode. Thank you all so very much for coming to attend our chat, and we look forward to sharing great music with you tomorrow. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.